Alright, in this talking head video, I'm just going to go over the thought process of decision making within the context of the training program or block. So this is probably more aimed at lifters than coaches, although coaches might be able to pick up some stuff from this. But it's more when you come in with your session plan and there's a deviation made, or you want to make a deviation based off how you feel within the training session, or if the reality of what's happening in the session isn't matching your expectation of what should be happening in the session, rather than creating a storm in the teacup and just kind of like reacting off your feelings there and then, is to take a chance or take a second to put it within perspective. And then after you've put it within perspective, and perspective isn't within the perspective of it's only training and they're starving kids in Africa and shit like that. It's within the perspective of the training, the goals, what you're doing, where you're at in the process, to then come up with better decisions that actually are going to meld with what you're trying to do. So we'll just look at it. So within a training plan, if we use periodization terminology, you have typically, you have quad-annual, the Olympic cycle within Olympic sports. They will use that kind of planning. It'll be very loose planning, but we talk specifically to the people I'm talking to. The longest time frame that you've probably got is a year of training or an annual plan. The annual plan will have very little detail. We'll just have the week, what the training focus is, and it'll maybe have like what the relative intensity is and maybe what the volume load is. And then that will vary over the year, and that's all planned out in advance. But it's not like intricate plans, and it's going to change. No one really has set out an annual plan for a sport like powerlifting, and it doesn't change. That's not really how reality works. So if you think about, let's have a look. We'll look at a few scenarios, just kind of like to develop this kind of thought experiment. So let's say you're week 1 of a 4-week block, and you're coming in to session 1, and the session is a single at 6, followed by 3 sets of 5 at like 70%, with an RP guide of like under 5 or R5 or whatever. So you come in and things are feeling great. You hit at 6, but it's actually pretty heavy. Maybe it's like 88%, or maybe it's even 90%. But you're honest with your RPs. You're not bullshitting yourself, and it's a genuine at 6. So there's actually shitloads of room here in this session to potentially go and hit a PB. So what someone might do there and then, who isn't thinking in context, they might just think, coach wrote plan, that's not plan, continue on with plan, and not take advantage of an opportunity to hit a massive milestone lift, or to make some like really cheap progress in the session. You might have someone who isn't thinking within, and that's not thinking within the context, that's just like, right, that's the plan, I'm sticking to the plan. And then you might have someone who just maxes out, hits a new PB, and then fails and gets greedy, and then tries to push past what they're capable of. They fails it, and then the next week they're throwing the toys out the pram when the session's shit, because they're not cognizant of the fact that they've just taken a max, which has pushed. Not only have they just taken a max, but they've also failed a heavy single, which has skewed the adaptive ramp that's been set out by the coach, and they're not, or the set out by the program they're following or whatever, and they're not taking into account the effect that their actions have had. Their actions have consequences. The consequences of which are further sessions and even further weeks of training are going to be affected by your actions in the moment. But then someone who's thinking within context, I'm feeling abnormally good. I know this is probably going to negatively affect, or it might not even probably, it might negatively affect the next 2 to 3 weeks of training, but I'm going to take this opportunity with both hands, and I'm going to set a new personal best, or I'm going to push the single to 9, because it's an opportunity to make some easy progress. And you might, if you've got a coach, an online coach, you might communicate that to them at the time, or you might communicate it to them afterwards. But you should communicate it with them. But any coach that isn't a fucking arsehole or is reasonable will be understanding of that. No one's gonna, like, if you come back, even if like it falls in a sarce, if you're honest with people and communicate that as long as there's a logic to it, you've thought about it, and there is basically there is a thought process and logic to it, then people aren't going to be mad unless they're micromanagers or overly controlling. I mean, most coaches just want to know that you've taken into consideration what's being planned and you've made a decision, and that's fine. The athlete should have autonomy to make decisions. You're not fucking droids that are controlled by a remote control. You're thinking, feeling human beings of varying levels of intelligence. But you should have autonomy to make decisions within the training program. And so that's like a scenario. So let's look at our scenario where someone's in week 2 of a training block. Week 1 was shit. They followed, say it's like a 3x10 block. Maybe they started off at 65%. Should have been like an RP 5 or under, but they had like an RP 6. So it's still not like hard. So it's still an appropriate entry point to the block, but it's harder than was expected. So they maybe decision 1, not within context, might be, I'm just going to do what the program says, and I'm just going to do 70%, and then I still feel shit. But the RP is now creep, so the RP was maybe meant to be at 6, but now it's like at 7, 8. So now we're pushing into the kind of like hockey stick with RPs, especially at higher reps. Like once the novelty's gone and you've done the microcycle and you've experienced the intervention and you've got rid of the kind of the DOM from the novelty effect. When RPEs are like 5, 6, 7, generally the adaptive pressure is pretty low, and as such the inflammation response and the recovery demands are also low. But there's almost like a bit of a hockey stick as soon as you get kind of like RP 8, 9, 10, especially 9, 10. Then there's a massive increase in like inflammation response. There's a massive increase in the suppressive effects of systemic fatigue, etc., etc. When you get into like the 8 to 10 region, that's generally when things start slowing down, or that's typically when people will start thinking about taking deloads. You do need to get into those zones, one, to practice or to be able to grind through heavy lifts, but also you need to put stress on. So there needs to be provision within a program to go in there. But if you go into that zone too early, you're basically just going to end up cutting the mesocycle or macrocycle in half in terms of the run rate for adaptation you get. You're going to maybe hit at 9 or at 10 at a way lighter weight than you would have done if you followed the ramp as was laid out. So that's someone who just blindly follows the plan. It doesn't take into context what's going on. And then we'll look at someone who maybe makes a positive, or someone looks at it in context and they say, okay, and typically speaking, the coach probably the coach might have interjected based off the input from the last week into the next week, but they might go, right, okay, I don't really want to repeat the load because it was still really easy. We have an at 6, we have an appropriate, although higher than I probably would have wanted, but we have an appropriate entry point for the ramp that we want to do. Now I'm gonna go to 68% rather than 70%, so it's a 2 or 3% increase. So it should allow them a bit of a leeway to come in, and then the athlete comes in, does a session, everything goes well, everything's within targets, so then you just jump to the next block, so you jump to the next progression, which might have been 75%. So then you jump like 7% rather than 5%. 5% was a planned jump, but you take a smaller jump and then a bigger jump, and then things kind of move on. So it's more just rather than coming in like without any kind of thought of where the session sits within the week, where the session sits within your month, where it sits within your year, warming up, and then, oh my god, I feel amazing, everything's class, flying high, or you come in and things don't feel good, and then everything's shit, and you want to quit, and you leave the gym because fuck this. It's trying to get away from that kind of bipolar response to training, as in, it's fucking amazing, or it's fucking shit, and just kind of going like that, because you're going to quit when you do that, and burnout's way higher, or burnout happens way faster with that kind of response, and people generally will just quit. Whereas you want to even things out. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. You want to have lower highs and higher lows, and follow a trend and a progression in a sustainable manner. And the best way to do that is to put things within the context of the training that you're doing. What week are you within the training cycle? What should this feel like? What was the goal? What's the difficulty? How's it actually feeling? Alright, so what adaptations, if any, am I going to make? If I'm not making an adaptation, I'm accepting that, and there might be knock-on consequences. If I'm doing more, it might negatively affect the next week. If I'm doing less, or if I'm just if I'm doing less, I'm doing less in the hope that the next training session where I repeat the stimulus, I'm gonna start hitting like an upswing. Yeah. Hopefully you found this useful. If not, whatever. Like, comment, subscribe. Right. Fuck off. See you later.